I think a thing that a lot of startups are challenged with right now is the idea of incrementality and optimizing towards incremental conversions and profitable conversions. This idea that a lot of marketing budget is going towards a few channels due to strong digital attribution, and we're actually oversaturating audiences and not really looking for diminishing returns and incremental conversions. um, when you come into a brand, and I know you do a lot of fractional advising, what are the kind of core metrics that you look at, and how do you think about optimizing towards that profitable conversion, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So a lot in that question, and I guess I'll start by answering. It really does depend on the size and stage of the company. Um, and so for a company that's relatively young and relatively simple, and maybe just sort of spends primarily in say one, perhaps two channels, it is it is easier, it's less complex to answer some of these core questions about what's incremental and what's truly valuable. When you get into multiple, and I'll say three or more channels with spend in the millions and millions of dollars per year, and definitely kind of above $10 million a year, then it is a lot more complicated, and it is more challenging to sort of tease out what's truly incremental, what is delivering a marginal return on ad spend that's favorable and positive. And those questions do become important. Um, where to begin? I mean, so let's put the smaller company aside for the moment, because that is
Sure.
relatively easy. And sort of to speak about these sort of more medium sized companies spending at least a few $1 million a year. Um,
Yes.
the starting point is just like what I'd want to understand is, okay, what tools what tools are you using, and really fundamentally, how are you answering the question today, right now, of whether your marketing is effective, is quote unquote working. And every company has that at some level. It may not be ideal, but they'll have a starting point. And again, it varies a little bit. I guess I'll give one quick example. You know, many companies rely on search marketing to sort of drive their growth, or that's their primary channel. Um, and that one I'm a little less reasonably less worried about, because someone kind of proactively goes into Google and is like, I'm looking for, backyard umbrellas, right? And so they are proactively raising their hand. They come to your site. Um, it's reasonable to assume that that ad that you put in front of them when they raise their hand is driving behavior that wouldn't otherwise have happened. If they knew of you already, they wouldn't have gone to Google, right? They would have come to you directly. So in search marketing, so like, I guess the question I'm asking, what are their core strategies? How big are they? What are their core strategy? Medium-sized company that's active in search. You know what? I'm not going to sweat it too much. I'm not going to worry about it too much, because the nature of search marketing, there's more just kind of inherent incrementality. But then you then go into channels where all other marketing channels, frankly, where people are not raising their hands. So kind of meta ads would be the obvious, but all of it, sort of TV or just anything. Then these questions about incrementality do become a lot more important. And so then it's a question of like, okay, what's your scale and sophistication of the marketing that you're doing in these non-hand raising channels? Um, what are the tools that you're using? And yeah, and then it's just case by case. But really, where I'd want to get to is, do you have some mechanism for understanding a baseline behavior, some mechanism for understanding people's likelihood to purchase in the absence of seeing an ad? Okay, great. You have that baseline understanding. So, okay, great. Now, when you put an ad in front of these folks, what kind of purchase activity do you see? And then it's the difference. Then it's the difference between those two things. And that's incrementality. And there's a lot of ways to get there. There's a lot of tools to do that, but just that's do you have something, or do you even understand that concept? Does that concept make sense? And then start talking through the tools and the processes to get there. It takes time. It's not like a kind of a one day, oh, we got this figured out. It's like a few weeks to really kind of sort it all out. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's the challenge, because if you look at someone that has a massive presence on paid social, they're running Facebook, TikTok, Pinterest, Snap, Twitter, Reddit, Quora, et cetera, all based on pixel based conversions, all looking for that user. None of those pixels talking to each other. So there's just a ton of saturation. You mentioned in a recent LinkedIn post that you think that MMM is going to be foundational to a measurement stack for most e-commerce brands.
Yeah, yeah, I do, and it's sort of, I mean, the example you just gave is a perfect example. All these sort of, this all this pixel-based reporting. One, it's all siloed, and so it's not talking to each other, so it overcounts a lot. That's one big issue. The second big issue is there are more and more restrictions on what that pixel-based reporting can share, with the advertiser. So it's getting degraded just kind of almost continually now. So it's like anything that's kind of click based or pixel based is kind of fundamentally challenged. And there are these emerging tools like media mix models that are kind of agnostic or indifferent to a click. They're just, it's just not part of the model, so it's okay. So they're much more sort of privacy friendly. um, and so that's one reason that they're very relevant to today's world. And then what's happening, this is kind of a fun part of the world we live in, so many startups, so many like good startups emerging to solve this problem. Like, thank you ecosystem, you're solving my problem. I'll say it, thank you capitalism, you've sort of given a reason for companies, for entrepreneurs to create solutions that solve the problems that I have. And that's totally what's happening. And it's, I find this stuff fun, but it's pretty exciting to see all of these new solutions emerging. I just heard of one more yesterday. And so it's just like, it's a good time, or there's a problem in the world, no question about it, but there are all these interesting solutions emerging as well.
For sure. Tons of new MMM models, tons of new ways to do incrementality. A lot of folks talking about lift studies and things like that. And yeah, it's awesome. And I know that sometimes advertising can get a little bit of a bad name, but it's really a beautiful thing that you can leverage to grow a business, grow an idea. And if you have a mission based business, there's just a lot of cool stuff that you can do with it. I know that you focus on e-commerce brands. When you kind of come into a company and you spend a lot of time at places like Allbirds and Zappos, you look at a media mix. They're doing some search, they're doing some paid social, they're doing affiliates, influencers, they're doing some branding, and they have all of these different spends and all these different ways of measuring it. How do you think about kind of like optimizing that thing? Um, it could be from testing different budgets, testing scaling in different areas. What's your kind of process for that?
Yeah, yeah. I'll start with something that's maybe not obvious, or maybe people don't think about it, but I start with just like a little bit of common sense, right? A little bit of a story about like, okay, who are we sort of speaking to in the world? And sort of, last year I did a lot of work with a company that sells science project kits for kids. They're really these fun projects, but it's obvious. It's sort of like it's parents, but then also grandparents, emphasize grandparents who are the primary buyers. And so it starts with sort of a common sense approach, like, okay, this is, my understanding of who buys this product. What are sort of common sense ways that I'm going to reach this audience? If it's parents, maybe, but grandparents, no way. I mean, grandparents are just not on TikTok. They're just not. And again, that's fairly obvious, but that's a starting point. And then at the margin, there might be things that are less obvious, or like a fun one that emerged is um, linear TV. Linear TV, like, that's an aging audience. I mean, that's like 50, 60, 70 people consuming linear TV. But you know what? If you're targeting grandparents, then it's awesome. Right. And then, like, that's not so hard to get your head around, but it starts with this, like, these common sense conversations about who am I going after? What's a fundamental strategy that makes sense, given that context. Yeah. Anyway, so that's the starting point. Um, I guess another thought that popped in my head when you asked the question is, boy, the interactions between different channels and different strategies. You're running linear TV, and you're running Facebook ads, and you're running search ads. That does get pretty gnarly, and really hard to sort of tease out and fully understand. And so things like a media mix model, that's what they're designed to do. They're designed, at least directionally, to get a sense of what the interaction impact is, but they're not perfect. And so the more channels you have, the more kind of types of touch points, frankly, the less fine grained your understanding is going to be. And you just have to live with that. But of course, there are tools that kind of help you get an insight, but it's just like, it's, it's not nearly as scientific as we all want it to be. And that's something I've just come to accept.